Okay, so your book includes a list of prescriptions, which is nice. A lot of academics don't do this, but you actually offer some solutions. Why don't you tell us what you think should be done to solve these problems, or at least ameliorate them?
Well, I think we should start thinking as feminists, and I still include myself as a feminist because I believe that there is such thing as patriarchy, and that gender crime does reflect and reinforce some inequalities. It's not the only player, but how can feminists think about being non-carceral? I'm really glad this book is coming out now because there's this big abolition movement sort of popping up right now. You see a lot of people into prison and policing abolition, and a lot of women are on the forefront of that,
Leaders.
which is really interesting. Women of color,
Mm-hmm.
and so they see it as a gender justice issue in that police, when they come into especially blighted neighborhoods, whether black or white, really, when you think about it, they're most of the time causing more damage. And when they cause damage to these communities, societies, children, a lot of the time women of color will bear the brunt of that, right? So they will bear the brunt of the dysfunction and the fact that policing was escalatory. So they see it as a gender and racial justice issue. Mm-hmm. So I suggest that, there are many other ways we can do feminism aside from putting people in jail. And in fact, if you're me, you think that, the whole concept of jailing people and of like exercising that kind of authority over them and putting them in spaces of sexual violence and then celebrating the sexual violence when they is not very feminist. So I actually would say be anti-prison, but if you don't want to be anti-prison, I'm sorry, this is my husband's computer. If you don't want to be anti-prison, you at least don't have to be pro-prison. So one thing that struck me all throughout these Title IX debates, and like, what's the best way to address campus rape? What's the best way to address campus rape? Everybody I met, from the Janet Halley side, sort of, anti-Title IX feminist side, to the pro-Title IX feminist side, all agreed that early, as in grade school early, sex education, not sex is dangerous and horrible, sexuality as in pleasure, consent, relationships, how to have sex, how to have good sex, all that, this is necessary. And there was no sort of person like clutching their pearls and saying, like every activist in the spectrum agreed with early sexuality education. And yet, when you hear the zillion things people are talking about in Title IX, it's hardly ever that. That's the harder one to do, right? That's the harder one to get parents and legislatures and stuff to go for.
Can I break in just for a second here?
Yeah.
And strike a discordant note here.
Yes.
Sex education. So I don't know what I think about that. I definitely do not like the idea of the government of any of the states or of the United States teaching my child about sex. So if that's what they're calling for, I am not with it. If they're calling for a cultural shift, a broad cultural shift in the way that we talk about sex with children, I'm all for it, especially if it's sex positive feminism that we're talking about moving toward. But too often, I think what they mean when they talk about sex education, don't you think, is the government teaching our kids in public schools about sex, which I think is just one of the most ridiculous ideas. Who would be in favor of that? If they step back from it and think about it, you want the legislature of your state, whatever your state is, I'm sure you have negative feelings about it, or the president or the Congress deciding, what is taught to your child about sex.
Right.
Ridiculous. Anyway, that's it.
I totally think you could be against how to structurally implement, a sexually educated, society, right? Like, so I think the principle is, I think that a lot of these things are happening on campus because of repression and lack of discussion about sex and nervousness, and that leads to drinking, and drinking leads to a lot of the miscommunication. And everybody's kind of on board with that. Now, how you administer that, I agree with you. I think your thought that the government doesn't teach sex ed, that ship sailed like so long ago, because they're teaching like abstinence and, diseases.
Even if they're not, like, why trust a stranger hired by the government, again, to teach your, 10-year-old child about sex and their body?
I don't know. I'm not an expert on delivery of education.
I know. That was sort of
that's kind of like out, but it's just an interesting thing. I think where the energy was placed towards I mean, if you want to be like, libertarian in that space, way more governmental solution, like actually putting people in jail, you know, like
Sure.
that, or, kicking people out of school and not letting them get any education.
Sure.
That is sort of where the minds went, instead of like, how can we,
Right.
create, whether culturally or not,
Yeah.
the
Absolutely.
conditions under which this doesn't occur.
Gotcha. Yep.
And nobody really had a debate about that. They would just kind of ruminate like it was pie in the sky, kind of like what the anti-poverty feminists felt back then when they were like, well, give women money. And they'd be like, yeah, sure. What about education? Yeah, we all agree with that, but we've got to do something.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
Okay.
I think there's some instant gratification in calling for criminal law.
Yeah.
It's very gratifying. I mean, it's very gratifying.
Okay. So you want better sex education,
I think so.
whether it's just cultural by parents or maybe by the government, we can leave up for another
Yeah.
discussion. But okay. So what else do you prescribe? How do we
I
get out of
also
it?
prescribe looking into these policing and prison abolition and on the ground community activist groups like Incite, Black and
I,
Pink.
I love Insight.
Yeah,
Vicky Law. I love
yeah, she's
Vicky Law.
great.
Yeah.
I mean, I've read a lot of her stuff.
Insight is all about this. I mean, it's almost, I thought about them a lot when I was reading her book. Vicky Law has a great video, by the way, which I've posted a few times. Everyone should look it up on YouTube, about alternatives to calling the cops when there's domestic violence or a possible rapist in your community. It's really, really inspiring stuff. But anyway, sorry, go ahead. Yep.
Yeah, so I talk about Incite. I talk about sort of the mothers in Chicago who would go out and do policing on their block in lieu of policing.
Yeah.
So they would like be passing out hot dogs and stuff, and it kept the block free of criminal activity. And it was really feminist in a way. It was organized by women, for women. It was called the Mothers March. So just ways in, so I who knows who this book will speak to, but like I had in my mind that it could speak to a certain one of my students who kind of grew up in this era of raise your mattress / Me Too, but at the same time grew up in this era of Black Lives Matter, and then feels very conflicted. Like, I don't know what to do because I'm told that I have to be really, really anti-rape and anti-DV and anti-violence against women, and then I'm told I have to be kind of anti-policing and anti-incarceration. So I feel stuck. And what I'm kind of saying to that person is, I don't think you should feel stuck, because I think there's a long history that has tethered feminism to incarceration, but it didn't necessarily have to go that way.
Right.
It just did go that way, so much so that we think it's natural and really radical to break that chain.
Excellent.
But you guys can do it, right? Like, this is the time for you to do it.
Excellent.
So that's what I'm hoping.
I love that.
Good.
Aya, your book's excellent.
Thank you so much.
It's just excellent. Everyone should read it. The Feminist War Against Crime. And I hope everyone reads it, or a lot of people read it. And it's rigorous, it's persuasive,